Hello, BookTube. I have been reliably informed just recently that somehow, despite all the starter kits that I have made on this channel, I have never made a starter kit on Rome. I didn't believe it the first time it was told to me. I didn't believe it the second time I was told to me, and then I was shown data and pictures, and it appears to be true that I have never made a starter kit on Rome. So I'm going to correct that in this video, but I do so with a fearful heart. This is a dangerous subject to talk about when it comes especially to books, because the subject of Rome, the subject of ancient Rome, brings out the worst in most of the men who talk about it. I don't know exactly why. The myth of a lost brotherhood, a sense of aggrievement, the fact that women were property. I don't know quite why, but I have developed an unconscious habit over the last 30 or 40 years of just gently avoiding the subject of ancient Rome when I'm talking to a man. When I'm talking especially to a male reader, I just sort of generally avoid it because it does something to them that is weird and necrotic and extremely unhealthy and extremely unattractive. I'm going to make this starter kit anyway, and I know that that a throat-clearing precautionary note will be lost on such men. They don't listen. The minute Rome comes up, they become reincarnated centurions. But I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to leave just a couple of quick throat-clearing precautionary notes ahead of time before we do the starter kit. First, this is a starter kit. This is meant for people who are approaching the subject for the first time. That does not mean I am approaching the subject for the first time. And second, this is meant for general interest readers, like the people who I love, the people who watch this channel. So I'm not going to do any kind of the pretentious crapola that the analog wristwatch wearing, Roman numeral spouting weirdo men who are affected by this subject love to do. In other words, it's Tacitus, not Tacitus. Okay, I'm not going to do any of that stuff, despite the fact that I love the subject of ancient Rome and have spent huge amounts of time researching in it. I've never been one of those guys. It doesn't affect me in that way. So just as a precautionary note, if you are one of those men and the YouTube algorithm brings you to this video and you are tempted to leave a comment, don't. Now, you're going to say, well, you mean tempted to leave an obnoxious comment. What if I don't leave an obnoxious comment? What if I leave some other kind of comment? You can't do it. You aren't physically able to do it. You aren't physically able not to be obnoxious and weird and condescending on this subject. I know from decades of experience. You might try, but you will fail. I do not want little pats on the head. Well, you know, when you get past these books, give me a ring. I'll help you out. I do not want any of the weird fetishization of the Latin language that you do. If the algorithm brought this video to your attention and you're not already a watcher of this channel, kindly stay silent. Just don't comment at all, because any comment that you make is going to be insufferable. And you can tell already, I'm a little wary talking about the subject, but I'm going to give it a try because it's insupportable that there is not a Rome starter kit on this channel. So we're gonna look at the entire subject of ancient Rome. Now, those of you who are coming to ancient Rome without much grounding are going to have a predictable response. It's 1,000 years of history. It had an enormous effect on the world, both ancient and modern. You're going to think, if you're coming to the subject fresh, I have no idea where to start. Where do I even start with this subject? And as with this subject, as with all subjects, the place to start is with a well-informed overview of the whole thing. And I have two to recommend to you. The first is by Michael Grant. This is his book, History of Rome. It is a big, fat history of Rome. It's readable. It's extremely thorough. It's extremely conscientious with what Michael Grant knew. This was written about 60 years ago. Not a whole lot has changed in that time, but in terms of radical paradigm-shifting knowledge of the subject. So Michael Grant's History of Rome is an excellent place to start. But there is another excellent place to start, and that is Will and Ariel Durant, who did a multi-volume history of human civilization, and they devoted a volume to Rome. They are wonderful writers, far more engaging than Michael Grant. No offense to him. And they did a book called Caesar and Christ. And the title alludes to one of the signature things, one of the gigantic signature things that we can think about when we think about ancient Rome, which is that it was the seedbed for Christianity. There are other things that you will associate with ancient Rome, gladiator fights, for instance, maybe the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Everyone will think of the fall of Rome as if it were one discrete thing. We'll get to that. But there are no, aside from this book, which is pretty good on that aspect of the subject, there are no other books on this list about the birth of Christianity. I'm assuming here, and I guess maybe I shouldn't, that I have done a Christianity starter kit. But whether I have or not, it is essentially a separate subject. So we're just going to deal with Rome here. And I don't want to give you the impression that this volume pays a huge amount of attention to that. The reason why this is called this is because those things were happening at the same time. Rome became a world power and was a huge, almost unprecedented Western world power when Christianity had its birth. But this still has tells you a lot about the birth and growth of Rome. Now, another thing that Rome will be known for is Hannibal and his elephants. Now, the elephants were a more or less trivial part of that whole thing, but Hannibal was part of the Second Punic War. As you can tell from the title, there was more than one. There were 3 Punic Wars, and what they were a series of wars in which the growing Republic of Rome fought for dominance of the Mediterranean basin, militarily. Became more and more, expanded more and more, appeared to have a nearly limitless levy on military-age fighting men, developed a great skill and proficiency in military matters, and it is not necessary in a starter kit for you to read about the First Punic War. And it is not necessary in a starter kit or anywhere else for you to read about the Third Punic War. But the Second Punic War is talismanic in a way, and a Roman starter kit without Hannibal be a fairly tawdry thing. So I want to recommend J.F. Lazenby's book, Hannibal's War, which is a very, very good modern history of the Second Punic War, and also fairly entertaining to read. I'm trying to keep that in mind in this starter kit with every subject that I'm talking to you about. There have been mountains written, and a lot of those mountains are well worth climbing, but not at the beginning. A lot of my favorite reading about ancient Rome is pretty steep scholarship. You will find none of that on this list. Edward Gibbon is not on this list. Ronald Sim is not on this list. But this, I think, is accessible to a starter kit reader, someone who wants to get an overview. Overviews are very good. They allow you to know where you want to concentrate. Of course, famously, the Romans also wrote about the Second Punic War, and the Roman historian Livy, who's one of my favorite writers, devoted many of the books of his long history of Rome to the war with Hannibal, which is a Penguin Classic volume. And unlike with a lot of other starter kit subjects, there are quite a few Romans on this list. Livy would certainly be one of them if you want to add an addendum to this. Ordinarily, in a starter kit, I would not be recommending many primary sources, which we would have to call the Romans writing about their own time. But the ancient Romans wrote really well. They wrote a lot. We have a lot of their literature. You might supplement this with Livy, but definitely don't start with Livy. Start with someone who is looking at the stuff that Livy got wrong or left out, and then move to a Roman with an agenda writing about the war with Hannibal. From there, so keep in mind, the Punic Wars were just one of many, many wars that Rome fought as it grew and wanted to gain control of a large tract territory. And that continued to be true as Roman citizenship grew, the population of Rome and satellite cities grew, as Rome's name became more known on the trade routes and in far distant ports. And that brings us to another bigger subject for which Rome is known, which is that it changed governments. In its history, it changed governments. Which might not sound like much, but it is a big deal. It went from a republic with elected offices. They weren't elections quite in the way that we understand them, but there was still some kind of public franchise. And the people at the top of that, the people at the top of the cursus honorum, the people at the top of the elected public edifice, were usually considered to be an ancient world version of servants of the people. They were usually considered not to be above the people. I'm saying usually and sort of and kind of because I don't want to draw too many parallels between this and, for instance, the first 240 years of American history. It was something. It wasn't everything that you could want, but it was something in the way of public franchise, usually by your tribe rather than by you individually. And that began to change. That system overextended. It was perhaps overcomplicated. It was definitely overcorrupt. It weakened. And as always, in every civilization, when that system weakens, there will be men waiting to take it down. They are waiting. They are watching. They are very sensitive to any such weakness. And that took a long time. That not long in geological sense or even in historical sense, but certainly longer than you could live through. For Rome to do that, for those systems to weaken to such an extent that a series of opportunistic monsters could deliver hammer blows to that system that would eventually destroy it and replace it with a fascistic autocracy. It wasn't called fascism, but it was an autocracy centered on one man with a misty-eyed false view of the past and a total repression of everyone to the whims of that one man. In other words, a fascist autocracy. Those words weren't used, and that process wasn't overnight, but that did start to happen, and you want to read about that. The fact that Rome changed its government is important in a starter kit of Rome. It didn't just stay the way it was. And I want to recommend a relatively recent book on the subject. This is by Mike Duncan, and it's called The Storm Before the Storm. And it's about that. It's about that change. It's about a man named Marius. It's about a man named Sulla. It's about a man named Cinna. It's about the brothers Gracchi. It's about that period when that fabric was thinning and people were testing its strength, see what they could get away with, see what they could do if they brought soldiers into the Pomeranians. So see what they could, the Pomerium, see what they could do if they pushed the system. Marius thought he could push the system. Sulla thought he could push the system and how the system would react. And Duncan does a really good job. This is not a long book. It is, I just realized that I said a dog breed for Pomerium. Well, that's all right. That's predictable at this point. Dead Romans, dead Kennedys, and dogs. This is that subject, and it's not a narratively concentrated subject, so you need someone to sort of bring the threads together, and Mike Duncan does a good job of that, and you're going to want to read that system. That transformation is important. Any kind of a republic that lives to a certain age can grow complacent. And if it does, its fabric will weaken, and there will always be men waiting for that fabric to weaken. Usually it will be men who owe everything to that fabric, who should be giving it their loyalty. Usually it will be them. Usually it won't be opportunistic outsiders. It will be men who owe everything to that fabric, who are still nevertheless waiting to rip it to shreds. You want to see how that happened in ancient Rome. And it did happen. And it was roulette wheel in a way. It could have been anyone who was there at the moment when the breaking point happened. Sometimes you need an extra special monster for it to happen. But the point that I want to make for these next recommendations is that it was extremely documented. The Romans knew what was happening. They knew that a fundamental seismic shift of their world was happening. And this was happening in one lifetime. And they wrote about it extensively. So some of them are worth reading on the subject. Not all of them wanted to chronicle it as a history. But if you've got a window into the world of what people were thinking and saying and doing in that time, you should definitely look through that window for a starter kit. So, for a starter kit, I want to recommend Cicero's Letters to Atticus in an English language translation. I believe the Penguin big fat, I think it's Shackleton Bailey who translates it. Whoever translates it, it's a good translation. It's got good notes, and I believe the Penguin volume is out of print. And I don't think there is anyone else printing this big volume. Cicero was a famous Roman. He was an orator. He was an advocate in court. He was the savior of his country, if you talk to him. And he watched it all. He knew all the players involved in the final moment of this transformation, from any semblance of a republic to an individual autocratic rule. He watched it happen. He was part of it and knew the people involved and wrote about it to his friends. That isn't the only subject of, for instance, the volume called Letters to Atticus, but it doesn't have to be, because these letters also show you his world, which is surely part of a starter kit. So I strongly recommend that you find a copy, and or if you can't find a copy of Cicero's Letters to Atticus, find any copy of Cicero's letters, Penguin or anybody else, and read all the introductory material, read all the notes, but also read the letters to see what a very intelligent, very cultured man was thinking of the events that he was watching right at ringside. But you also want to read modern histories of this time period. And I want to recommend one that by A.J. Languth. This is A Noise of War, which is about the men who were involved in this transformation, foremost being Julius Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar was the man who saw his chance. All of them had seen it before him, but he saw that it could actually happen, that I could make the state my own personal property, despite the fact that I owe everything to it, that my family owes everything to it. I could still do it. I could still do that. If that basic, decent patriotism doesn't restrain me, well, then I have this as a prize that I can take. And he had to defeat Pompey the Great to do that, and someone had to take that prize when he was gone, and that is Octavian, the man who became Augustus. This is that crucial period when you could have lived, if you'd been a teenager, when you were a free Roman, and you somehow managed to survive the purges and the bloodbaths and the drafts and the wars and whatnot, you could be in your early middle age, as you would never use the word, but nevertheless it was factually true, the slave of a king. That would have happened in your lifetime. And Languth is a fantastic writer. He's really, really engaging. So, well worth doing. And then in a starter kit on ancient Rome, there's a speech in Julius Caesar's play, William Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, that I am tempted to quote at length here, about how the name of an entire city and its entire illustrious past becomes the name of one man. And the speech is given in anger in Julius Caesar, but it is nevertheless true. When people think of Rome, they think of Julius Caesar, Gaius Julius Caesar. So when you're dealing with a starter kit of ancient Rome, you really have to read a biography of Julius Caesar. Now, you could get off easy by reading, again, an ancient Roman. Suetonius wrote the 12 Caesars, and one of those lives is a life of Julius Caesar. But you want to read a modern life, too. I have here Adrian Goldsworthy's book. It's a big, fat, hardcover life of Julius Caesar. It will be that time period. It will be Julius Caesar's youth. It will be Goldsworthy is good on his ancestry, on the ancestry of the Caesar family. The political upheavals that gave him the opportunities that he needed, also himself as a man. You have to read a biography of Julius Caesar to do a starter kit of ancient Rome. Now, if you don't want to do that, I understand completely. He's not a nice person to spend time with. If you don't want to do that, then you can get around it with Suetonius, who one of whose lives is Julius Caesar, and gives you the basics. And if you're worried when you read an ancient source that, well, what about the stuff they didn't know? Like Livy, what about the stuff they didn't know? What about the stuff they left out? How do I know that this isn't the kind of scientific history that the Germans gave us 200 years ago? This feels different. It feels like I shouldn't quite trust this, no matter how much I'm enjoying it. Suetonius is very enjoyable to read. I understand that completely, and the way around that is not to avoid Suetonius or, for instance, Livy, but to read a good annotated translation. To read something where the annotator of the book is telling you in the footnotes what is missing here. And for that, so I want to recommend Suetonius' Lives of the Caesars in a translation by Catherine Edwards for Oxford World Classics. This will give you all of that, and you won't have to worry that Suetonius himself, unadorned, is leading you astray. This there on the cover is the end of Julius Caesar. Because when he got too close to pronouncing himself a king, and you are all my slaves, ambitious men killed him. You might be tempted when you read the Suetonius' Life of Julius Caesar to read other things, other lives in this. You feel free. It's really, really good. And as long as I'm recommending an ancient Roman, an actual primary source, or as close as we can get, I want to recommend another one, the aforementioned Tacitus. I want to recommend his book on this subject, The Annals of Imperial Rome. This is the Penguin Classic. Oxford also does this, and if you don't have Latin, either one will do just fine. Read the introduction carefully. I think both of them have a separate translator's note. Read that carefully. Get a few comments on what the translator faced in translating Tacitus. Make sure that you're paying attention to the notes and whatnot, but this will do just fine. And again, much like with reading a biography of Julius Caesar, a starter kit of ancient Rome without Tacitus is a little bald. It's a little lacking. So if you want, you should do that. And then that happened. There were military parades. They were called triumphs. The judiciary was undercut. The leader and his cohorts were put beyond the reach of law. They coerced the courts into saying that they weren't liable for what they do, that the law can't touch them. They were given the equivalent of supremacy acts. This is an old pattern. Rome is not the first time where it happened. Rome is one of the most famous times where it happened, where gradually one man runs everything. He becomes the boss. He endlessly touts himself. He encourages people to tout him on his behalf. And the state becomes his property and the property of whatever you want to say are his heirs or his family. When that happens, when a previously free republic becomes the property of a man, that's fascism. That is never done without a misty-eyed glance at the past, at an idealized past that isn't real. That is never done without cracking down on free speech or eliminating it. That is never done without undermining the courts so that they cannot declare you to be in contempt of court, for instance. It's always done with appeals to tinny, fake, easy, manipulative nationalism to make Rome great again. It's always done in that way, that we are emerging from a dark and distant past that was horrible, and there are factors all around us that are trying to degrade our native strength, and we will win against them, but I'm the only one who can do it. I alone can fix this problem, so you need to give me complete power. I won't abuse it. You just need to give it to me. And then I will make things right, and then I will set that burden aside, and we will go back to being free and multi-voiced and a wonderful representative republic. Octavian, the name that we saw, became a Roman emperor named Augustus, and he made that claim for 40 years. When that happens, when a state falls like that, as I've said on this channel under other contexts many, many times, it only ever ends one way. That man will hand on power to his 7-foot-tall son. He will hand on power that way. It will no longer be a matter of electoral representation. And the state will get more and more corrupt, obviously, because there are no more checks and balances. And it will also become hungrier and more angry. It will become corrosive towards other nations, where it will suddenly be, we're not content with just shoring up our own past and advocating a stridently patriotic picture of ourselves. Instead, it will be, we kind of think you want to be a state in our union, whether you do or not. We kind of think we want to buy you. I mean, if you don't like it, well, too bad. We have the power. Do you want to be part of the incredibly ironically titled Pax Romana, or do you not? That can go on. Sometimes that happens for a year. Sometimes it happens for 4 years, 10 years, 100 years. But it only ever has one end, and that is destruction from the outside. It's important to understand that. Hereditary monarchies are not what I'm talking about. Hereditary monarchies can be revised or overthrown from within. Fascist autocracies dedicated to one boss cannot be. They kill their rebels. So they have to be overthrown from the outside. And famously, that happened to Rome. The fall of the Roman Empire. Why did Rome fall? That sort of grade school essay question. It's a fake question. It happened in waves, but it did happen. Rome faced one after another wave of barbarian invasions, barbarian incursions, as corruption became so great that the state stopped even effectively protecting itself. And you have to read at least one book on the fall of Rome in order to read a starter kit of Rome. And I know that the famous book here is Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, but even in a one-volume abridgment, that is not for a starter kit. Not just in terms of the depth of Gibbon's research, which I don't believe has ever been equaled by anyone, but also with his diction, with the way he writes. It's something that you want to read once you know you love the subject, not in order to love the subject. So I want to recommend instead Peter Heather's book, The Fall of the Roman Empire, which is about the successive waves of hammer blows that destroyed the Republic from without. Or not the Republic, the Empire from without. So it still had emperors. It still even had a Senate. The Senate didn't do much. It had been defanged. It had been defanged centuries earlier when it had the power to stop that from happening. A key, crucial characteristic of previously relatively free republics that fall to military fascism is that in every single case they had the power to stop it from happening and just did not exercise that power until it was too late. When they looked around and realized, well, if I even advocate exercising that power, I will simply be killed. The Gestapo, ICE, will show up at my door and simply kill me. And the recourses that I have to that in law, well, I signed off on weakening them, so they aren't there anymore. When things reach that point where the state is so incredibly corrupt that it's vulnerable from the outside, well, again, there will be men who will be watching. And that's what this book is about. The wave after wave of barbarian invasions that eventually ended the empire in the West. And it's full of details, full of a lot of names you won't know, but Heather does a really good job of making it into a narrative. So you're going to want to read, when you read a Roman starter kit, you're going to want to read about the end. But the end was not actually completely the end. There was a powerful empire that existed for 1,000 years after this, whose people called themselves Romans, who called their government the Roman Empire. And you're going to want to read about that too, because I say in the West, because there was an empire in the East as well, in Byzantium. That went on for a long time, and it is the necessary coda to a Roman starter kit is to read about that. And there's a great one-volume book by Anthony Caldelis, The New Roman Empire. It's relatively modern. This thing will not be out of print. It will probably be in your library. And as a capstone to your ancient Rome starter kit, this is not ancient Rome anymore, but as a capstone to your ancient Rome starter kit, you've got to read a good overview of Byzantium, of the empire in the East. And this is really good. This is a book that I was calling for decades. We finally got it. So there you go. That will end things, because after that, Byzantium is handing you into the Middle Ages, and Rome is well and truly gone by then. It is a distant memory. So those are overview volumes of periods in Rome's history and one man, and Rome's fall and eventual transformation. Those are big overviews. If you read those, you will know what aspects of the history of ancient Rome you are most interested in. And you're not pursuing a doctorate here, so that's where you want to go. That's where you want to go. There's no obligation here for you to be interested in all of it. But if you have overviews, and maybe more concentrated overviews of specific periods, well, then you will know what you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in Cicero. Just Cicero. His life, all of his writings, maybe you're interested in that. You won't know until you read an overview. Your own instincts as to what appeals to you and what doesn't will jump right out at you when you're doing that. Maybe you're reading that big biography of Julius Caesar and you decide, the thing that interests me the most here is Cleopatra. Okay, well, there's an ocean of books on Cleopatra, and now you'll know. And the best part is with a starter kit or with these overviews is that you will have the context first. So you won't be borrowing out from your specialization. You'll be borrowing into a specialization, which is the right way to do it. So anyway, there you go. That corrects things. There is now a starter kit on this channel on Rome. So I will wrap this up and wait with fear and trembling the comments that are going to come despite my precautions. So I will wrap this up, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.